I was searching for firewood, said the rancher. Found 3 Apache women in an old shack. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. The air was crisp, and the sun had already begun its slow descent behind the distant mountains when Lucas Ford, a solitary rancher, saddled his horse and set out to gather firewood for the coming winter. He had lived alone for nearly a decade, ever since the tragic fire that consumed his family's ranch and took his wife and son. In the years that followed, the memories of those days became a constant companion, one he often wished he could escape. As the wind whispered through the sparse trees, Lucas' mind wandered back to those happier times, when his house was full of life and laughter. Now, it was a place of silence, where only the sound of his boots crunching on the dry ground broke the stillness. Riding deeper into the woods, he noticed a peculiar sight, a small, dilapidated shack that he had never seen before. It stood out among the sparse trees, its wooden frame weathered by years of exposure to the harsh elements. It looked abandoned, yet there was something about it that caught his attention. Curiosity got the better of him, and Lucas guided his horse toward the shack, his heart quickening with each step. He had always prided himself on knowing every corner of his land, but this shack was unfamiliar. As he drew closer, the door creaked open, revealing 3 women standing inside. At first glance, they looked like any other travelers, dirty, tired, and in need of help. But as Lucas approached, he noticed something was different. They were dressed in traditional Apache attire, their faces painted in ways he had only seen in stories. The oldest woman, her face lined with the wisdom of many years, met his gaze. Her eyes, though filled with suspicion, softened slightly when she saw the kindness in his expression. Lucas' heart skipped a beat. He had heard stories of the Apache people, of their fierce independence, their strength, and their ability to survive in the harshest conditions. But he had never expected to meet them like this, in the middle of the wilderness, far from any village or settlement. As he dismounted, the 3 women stepped forward. The air between them was tense, and Lucas could feel the weight of their gaze on him. The oldest woman spoke first, her voice low and steady. "You are not one of us," she said, her eyes scanning him for any sign of danger. Lucas raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm just looking for firewood," he replied, his voice calm. The women exchanged wary glances, and for a moment, Lucas wondered if he had made a mistake. But then, the youngest woman, her face still youthful despite the hardships she had endured, stepped forward. "You helped us," she said, her words carrying an unspoken weight. Lucas frowned, not understanding what she meant. "What do you mean? I've just come to help." The older woman's eyes softened, and she placed a hand on the younger woman's shoulder. "We have been running for days, hiding from those who would do us harm. We were lost, but now, we have found you." Lucas felt a pang of unease. He had no idea who they were running from, but something about the way they spoke made him realize this wasn't just a random encounter. These women were in danger. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting someone to appear from the shadows, but the forest remained still. He turned back to them, his decision already made. "You can stay here for the night. I have a cabin not far from here," he said. "I'll take you there. It's not safe to stay out here." The women nodded in unison, their eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. As they left the shack, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting would change everything. Little did he know, this chance encounter with 3 Apache women would lead to a journey that would alter the course of his life forever. As Lucas helped the 3 Apache women onto his horse, he could feel the weight of their history pressing down on him. The wind had picked up, and the trees whispered their warnings. But Lucas paid no attention to the rustling sounds. He had made up his mind. He was going to help them. He led the horse slowly, feeling the unease rise in his chest. These women were running from something, and as they rode together toward his cabin, he couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just escaping the wilderness. They were running from something far worse. The journey to his cabin was a short one, but every step seemed to drag on longer than it should. When they finally arrived, the women dismounted with a quiet grace, each one more wary than the last. Lucas gestured toward the cabin, trying to reassure them with a small, understanding smile. "You can rest here for the night," he said, though he wasn't sure if it was for their sake or his own. He had never been one to entertain guests, much less strangers from a culture he knew little about. The older woman gave him a long, searching look before nodding. "Thank you," she said in a voice that was both tired and grateful. The youngest woman, who had barely spoken since their arrival, stepped forward with a wary glance. "We don't want to bring trouble," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. Lucas shook his head. "No trouble. You're safe here for the night. That's all I can offer right now." The women entered the cabin, and Lucas followed them, shutting the door behind him. The inside of the cabin was sparse but functional, just the way he liked it. There was a fire already crackling in the hearth, and the smell of burning wood filled the air. It was a modest home, but it had always served its purpose. Lucas motioned toward the small table in the corner. "Sit. I'll make some food. You must be hungry." The women hesitated but then sat down, their eyes still scanning their surroundings as though they were expecting danger to leap out from the shadows. As Lucas busied himself with preparing a simple meal of stew and bread, the women spoke in hushed tones among themselves. Lucas couldn't understand their language, but he could feel the tension in the air. He made sure to keep his movements slow and deliberate, not wanting to startle them. As he set the food down in front of them, he noticed the youngest woman glance at him with something more than curiosity, something that bordered on recognition. It was as if she had seen him before, but he couldn't place where. He sat across from them, trying his best to ignore the growing sense of unease gnawing at him. The fire crackled softly, the only sound filling the space. The woman who had spoken earlier, the eldest, finally broke the silence. "You don't know who we are, do you?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Lucas looked up, surprised by the question. "No, I don't," he said honestly. "I only know that you need help. That's all." The woman nodded, her eyes dark and unreadable. "We are Apache. Our tribe has been hunted by those who fear us. We've been running for days, hiding from men who would kill us without a second thought." Lucas felt his heart tighten. He had heard of Apache raids in the past, but he never imagined he would find himself involved in such a situation. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice soft. The woman's eyes met his with a steady gaze. "Because you saved us. You didn't ask questions. You didn't turn us away. You gave us shelter. And for that, we will never forget." The youngest woman's eyes softened, and she added, "You didn't have to, but you did. And now, we owe you our lives." Lucas felt the weight of their words settle in his chest. He hadn't expected gratitude, nor had he anticipated the bond that was already forming between them. He had merely done what any decent person would do. He had helped those in need. But now, it seemed, this simple act of kindness was going to change the course of his life. As the night wore on, the women slowly began to relax, their guarded expressions softening. They ate in silence, the tension slowly dissipating. Lucas couldn't help but feel that something much larger than a simple act of kindness was at play. He had a feeling that this night, this unexpected meeting, was just the beginning of a much bigger story, one that would change everything for him and for the Apache women he had taken in. In the days that followed, Lucas did his best to make the 3 Apache women feel at home. They stayed quietly at his cabin, only venturing out when necessary, always alert, their eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting danger to come charging down on them at any moment. Lucas couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of responsibility. The women had trusted him, a stranger, and in return, he had given them shelter. But he knew the world they came from was far more complicated than he could understand. They weren't just hiding from a random group of men. They were fleeing something far deeper, something tied to their very existence. The youngest woman, whose name he had learned was Kaya, rarely spoke. When she did, it was often a quiet whisper, like she was afraid her words might betray them. The older woman, Ayana, seemed to carry a quiet strength, and though her body showed signs of the struggles she'd faced, her eyes revealed a wisdom that came from surviving a life most could not imagine. It was in these moments, when the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, that Lucas found himself looking at these women with a sense of awe. Despite the exhaustion in their faces, there was a fire in their eyes, an unwavering determination. It was clear that they had been through hardships, unimaginable ones, but they weren't broken. One evening, as Lucas sat by the fire, the sound of hooves reached his ears. He froze, his body going still. The women also stood up, their faces instantly alert, as if they, too, had sensed something was wrong. Without a word, Ayana moved toward the door, and Kaya followed, her steps hesitant but quick. Lucas felt his heart race. Was this the moment they had been waiting for? The men who had been chasing them? He stood up and went to the door, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle he kept by the fireplace. The women gave him a look, a silent warning to stay back, but Lucas wasn't about to let them face whatever was outside alone. He opened the door just enough to peer outside. The night was darker than usual, and the wind had died down. In the distance, he could see shapes moving in the shadows. Horses, riders, and the faint sounds of low voices. His heart pounded in his chest as the figures drew nearer. His mind raced with thoughts of what to do. He had no idea who these men were, but he wasn't about to let his guests, his new friends, be dragged away into the night. Without thinking, he stepped outside, his hand tightly gripping the rifle. Ayana reached out and placed a firm hand on his arm, her eyes locking onto his. "Stay back," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of years of survival. "This is not your fight." Lucas shook his head, his grip tightening. "You've already fought enough," he said, his voice low but determined. "I'm not just going to let you be taken." He could see her hesitation, but it was only for a moment. Then, as if she had come to a decision, she nodded and motioned for him to follow her. The two women stepped out into the open, their movements calm and deliberate. Lucas followed closely behind, still gripping the rifle, though the sight of Ayana and Kaya made him realize just how much they didn't need him. The men approaching them weren't a threat to Ayana and Kaya. They were just a small group of Apache warriors, searching for their lost sisters. The tension in the air lifted, replaced by an unspoken understanding between the two groups. Ayana exchanged a few words in Apache with the leader of the warriors. Lucas didn't understand the language, but the tone was clear. It was not a fight, it was a reunion. As the warriors dismounted, Ayana stepped forward and embraced one of the men, a look of relief crossing her face. Kaya stood still, watching the exchange with a solemn expression. Lucas couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over him as well. The night had been full of tension, but now, it seemed as if the storm had finally passed. The warriors offered a silent nod to Lucas before they turned and left, disappearing into the night with Ayana and Kaya. The cabin, once again, fell into silence. Lucas stood at the door, watching them leave, his mind racing with thoughts of the strange journey he had found himself on. He had opened his home to these women, and in return, they had given him a glimpse into a world far different from his own. And though the night had passed without violence, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. His life, which had once been so quiet, was now forever changed. As the days passed, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing on the horizon. The Apache warriors had left, but Ayana and Kaya remained at his cabin. Despite the calm that had settled over them, a quiet tension lingered in the air. Lucas continued to go about his daily routine, chopping wood, tending to his cattle, but his thoughts often drifted back to the two women. They had become more than just guests in his home. They had become a part of his life, though neither of them had yet fully opened up to him. Kaya, the youngest, still kept to herself, her eyes distant, as if constantly searching the shadows. Ayana, on the other hand, had grown more comfortable with Lucas, though she remained guarded. She would often sit by the fire at night, staring into the flames, lost in thought. Lucas decided that it was time to talk to her, to get some answers. He had helped them, yes, but he had no idea what they were truly running from. The weight of their silence pressed on him, and he felt an urge to understand their past. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, casting a warm glow over the land, Lucas found Ayana sitting outside the cabin, her back against the weathered wall. The cool air bit at his skin, and he wrapped his coat tighter around him before stepping outside. He sat down next to her, but there was a long silence before either of them spoke. Finally, Ayana turned to him, her eyes soft but filled with the weight of unspoken words. "You want to know what we are running from, don't you?" she asked, her voice low. Lucas nodded, his heart beating faster. I don't know who I'm protecting here, he said. I need to understand more. What's really going on? Ayana sighed, her breath visible in the cold night air. It's not just a group of men chasing us, Lucas, she said, her gaze distant. It's more than that. We are being hunted for who we are. For our people. She paused, her eyes glistening with a mixture of pain and anger. The world has never accepted us. Not truly. We've lived in the shadows for as long as I can remember, but there are those who want to see us wiped out completely. They won't stop until we are gone. Lucas felt his stomach tighten. He had known that the Apache people had faced persecution, but hearing Ayana speak so openly about it made it feel all the more real. I don't understand, Lucas said, his voice steady but filled with confusion. Why? Why are they after you? Ayana turned her head, meeting his gaze with a solemn look. Because we are Apache, she said simply. And because we carry a power that many fear. It's a power that runs deep in our blood, passed down through generations. We are the last of our kind, Lucas. And there are those who want that power for themselves. Lucas was silent for a long moment, the weight of her words settling in his chest. What do you mean by power? He asked, still trying to wrap his head around it. Ayana shook her head slowly, her lips pressed together as if deciding how much to reveal. The land we live on is sacred, she began. It holds the memories of our ancestors, the strength of our people. Some believe that if they control the land, they can control us. It's why they're hunting us. And it's why we can't stop running. Her voice faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. Kaya and I are the last of our tribe's bloodline. We were sent away to keep us safe, to protect what remains of our people. But now, we're trapped. We can't run forever. Lucas felt a shiver run down his spine. He had been living in his own world, in his own quiet life, but now, he realized, it was impossible to ignore the truth of their struggle. They were caught in a fight for survival, one that reached back through the generations. So what do we do now? Lucas asked quietly. Ayana looked at him, her expression resolute. We can't hide forever, Lucas. The time will come when we have to fight. But until then, we need to be ready. We need to know who our enemies are, and we need to protect ourselves. She stood up, dusting off her clothes, and turned to face the night. The warriors who came before, they were just a small part of something much bigger. The real battle is yet to come. Lucas stood beside her, his heart pounding in his chest. He had always lived a life of quiet solitude, but now he knew that wasn't enough. He had a choice to make. Would he turn away and live his life as he always had, or would he stand by Ayana and Kaya and fight for a cause far greater than he could have ever imagined? As the night settled around them, Lucas knew one thing for sure. The world they were facing was much bigger than he could have ever prepared for, but he wasn't going to turn his back on it. Not now. In the days following their conversation, Lucas found himself unable to shake the weight of Ayana's words. He had always lived a quiet, solitary life, but now he was tangled in a battle far bigger than anything he could have imagined. He had promised to help these women, but as the truth of their struggle began to sink in, he realized this wasn't just about shelter or food. It was about survival, about standing up for a people who had been hunted for generations. The winds had changed, and Lucas knew that it wasn't just the Apache who were in danger now. It was his life, too. One morning, just as the sun broke over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the land, a group of riders appeared in the distance. The figure leading them was unmistakable. It was the same Apache warrior who had come to his cabin days before. This time, however, he wasn't alone. Behind him rode a dozen more warriors, all of them dressed for battle. Lucas' heart skipped a beat. The uneasy peace he had felt since the first group left was now shattered. He knew that this moment had been coming. Ayana had spoken of it, but nothing could have prepared him for the sight of so many riders, each one carrying the weight of a mission that was far beyond his understanding. As they approached, Lucas stood on the porch of the cabin, his hand on the rifle at his side. He had no intention of being caught unprepared. The warriors dismounted slowly, their eyes scanning the cabin with the practiced wariness of those who had spent their lives in the wild. The leader, the man who had spoken to him before, approached Lucas with a stern expression. "You've given shelter to those we seek," he said, his voice deep and unyielding. Lucas nodded, trying to steady his nerves. "They needed help," he replied. "I gave them that." The warrior's eyes narrowed, studying him carefully. And now you are caught in something bigger than you can understand. Lucas stood his ground, his grip tightening on the rifle, but he didn't raise it. He knew that the tension between them was growing thick, like the calm before a storm. I'm not looking for trouble, Lucas said, his voice steady. I've helped them. And now I'm asking you to leave. Whatever it is you're after, it's not my fight. The warriors stepped closer, the tension crackling between them. For a moment, there was silence. Then the warrior spoke again, his voice low. It is your fight now. You've crossed a line. You've given them a place to hide, and now you will pay the price. Lucas felt a shiver run down his spine. He had hoped that helping these women wouldn't drag him into the conflict, but now it seemed that was impossible. The warrior's words hung in the air, and Lucas knew that his life, for better or worse, had changed forever. But just as the tension reached its peak, a voice broke through the silence. It was Ayanna. She stepped forward, her expression fierce but calm. He is not our enemy, she said, her voice cutting through the growing storm. The warrior looked at her, his face unreadable. And you think that will stop me? He asked. Ayanna met his gaze, unwavering. You are not here for him. You are here for me. The warrior hesitated, his eyes shifting to the others behind him. Then, in a motion too quick for Lucas to follow, he nodded. You are right, he said quietly. But know this. There are others who will come, and they will not be as understanding. With that, the warrior turned and mounted his horse, signaling for the others to follow. One by one, they rode off, disappearing into the distance as quickly as they had arrived. Lucas stood in the doorway, his heart still racing, watching them go. The silence that followed was deafening. Ayanna turned to him, her expression softer now, though the weight of her words still lingered. This isn't over, she said, her voice low. The battle has only just begun, and you're in this with us, whether you want to be or not. Lucas nodded, though a part of him still wanted to walk away from it all. But he knew he couldn't. Not now. Not after everything he had seen. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land, Lucas felt a new sense of resolve settling in his chest. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to stand by and watch the people he had come to care about be dragged into a war they couldn't escape. He would stand with them, no matter the cost. Days passed after the Apache warriors left, but the tension never truly left the air. Lucas had a hard time sleeping at night, knowing that more trouble was bound to come. He had offered his home to Ayanna and Kaya, but now it seemed the quiet life he had once known was slipping away. He had become entangled in a battle that was not his own, a war that he didn't fully understand. And yet, as Ayanna had said, it was his fight now. The next morning, just as the sun was rising, Lucas was tending to his cattle when he heard the sound of hooves. His heart skipped a beat, and instinctively, his hand went to the rifle slung over his shoulder. This time, there were no warriors, no Apache men coming for his guests. Instead, it was Ayanna, her figure emerging from the shadows of the trees, walking toward him with purpose. She was alone. The calmness of her stride told Lucas she had something important to say. He lowered the rifle and stood waiting for her to approach. It's time, she said simply as she reached him. Lucas frowned. Time for what? Ayanna stopped in front of him, her eyes steady and full of resolve. It's time for us to take action. The others will come, and we can't keep running. We need to fight for our future, for our people, for what's left of us. Lucas looked at her, uncertainty filling his chest. He had never been a fighter. His life had been one of peace and solitude, not of battle and bloodshed. But Ayanna's words stirred something inside him. He knew that she was right. The threat was not going to go away. What do you need from me? He asked, his voice calm, but with a trace of fear. Ayanna nodded, her expression unwavering. We need your help to prepare. There is a battle coming, and we can't face it alone. We have allies, but we need to be ready. You know the land better than anyone. We can use that to our advantage. Lucas nodded slowly, understanding that his life had already been changed in ways he never expected. But now, with Ayanna standing before him, there was no turning back. I'll help, he said. What do we do first? Ayanna's eyes softened just slightly. We need to gather more supplies, weapons, and allies. We need to fortify this place, make it defensible. The weight of her words settled heavily on Lucas. He had never thought of himself as a protector, but in this moment, he realized that he was already a part of something bigger. A small part, perhaps, but a part nonetheless. That day, they began preparing. The hours passed quickly as they gathered what they could: wood, tools, any supplies they might need for the coming days. As they worked together, Lucas couldn't help but notice the quiet strength in Ayanna. She was a leader in every sense of the word, even though she wasn't asking for anyone's respect. It was simply there, in the way she carried herself, in the decisions she made. Kaya, too, had become more active. She no longer hid in the shadows, but worked alongside them, her movements steady and sure. In the evenings, the three of them sat around the fire, talking about their plans, their strategy, and what they needed to do next. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was about taking a stand. As the days passed, word began to spread. The Apache people were gathering, moving in from different parts of the region. A war party was forming, and soon, it would be time to fight. But Lucas wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had faded, replaced by a sense of duty. He didn't know how this would end, but he knew that he couldn't turn his back on Ayanna and Kaya. He had already chosen his side, and he would stand by them no matter what. The morning of the battle came faster than he had expected. Lucas stood with Ayanna and Kaya, watching as the Apache warriors assembled in the distance. There were dozens of them, all riding in formation, their faces set in determination. Lucas felt a surge of respect for them. These were not just survivors. They were warriors, fighting for something greater than themselves. "Are you ready?" Ayanna asked, her voice steady and calm. Lucas looked at her, the weight of everything resting on his shoulders. But in that moment, he felt a clarity he hadn't known before. "I'm ready," he said. And as the first wave of Apache warriors rode toward the enemy, Lucas knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger fight. A fight for freedom, for survival, and for the Apache people who had never given up, no matter the cost. The day of the battle arrived with the first light of dawn. The air was thick with the tension of what was to come. Lucas stood alongside Ayanna and Kaya, his heart pounding as they watched the Apache warriors gather, preparing for what would be the most significant confrontation in their struggle. The camp was bustling with activity, but despite the chaos, there was a deep sense of unity. These people were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their very existence, for their freedom. As Lucas took a deep breath, he could feel the weight of the decision he had made. There was no turning back now. He was in this fight, whether he was ready or not. Ayanna turned to him, her eyes steady and focused. "We've come this far, Lucas," she said softly. "This is where we stand." Her words were a quiet affirmation, but they held a power behind them that steadied Lucas. He nodded, unable to speak, his throat tight with emotion. Kaya stood next to them, her face grim, but there was a strength in her that Lucas had come to admire. She was no longer the hesitant young woman he had first met. She had grown into someone fierce, unyielding. Together, the three of them stood, watching the Apache warriors mount their horses, preparing for the ride that would change everything. The battle would not be easy, but there was no choice. The enemies were many, but the resolve of the Apache people was stronger. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Lucas asked, his voice thick with uncertainty. "It's a fight that has to be fought," Ayanna replied simply. "We will not let our people be erased. We will not be erased." With those words, she mounted her horse, signaling for Kaya to follow. Lucas, now feeling the weight of his commitment, climbed onto his own horse, his grip tight on the reins. He looked toward the horizon, where the enemy forces were gathering, and his heart raced with both fear and resolve. The ride to the battlefield was a long one, the ground beneath them rough and unforgiving, but the warriors rode with determination, as though they had been preparing for this day their whole lives. As they neared the battlefield, the sight of the enemy forces sent a ripple of dread through Lucas, but he held his ground. The battlefield stretched out before them, a vast open plain. The enemy soldiers, heavily armed, were already in formation, waiting for the Apache warriors to arrive. Lucas swallowed hard as he realized how many of them there were, far more than the Apache could hope to defeat. Yet, Ayanna's words echoed in his mind. "We will not be erased." The Apache warriors began to line up, their horses stamping the ground beneath them, their eyes steely with determination. Lucas could see the fire in their hearts, the same fire that had burned in Ayanna and Kaya ever since he had met them. They were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their right to live freely, to preserve their culture, and to defend their land. Ayana raised her hand, signaling for the charge. The Apache warriors spurred their horses forward, their movements swift and precise. The clash of steel and the sound of hooves pounding the earth echoed in the air as the battle began. Lucas fought alongside them, his rifle in hand, doing his best to stay focused, but it was difficult. The chaos of battle was overwhelming. The shouts, the screams, the gunfire. He had never been in a fight like this before. His heart raced, and for a moment, he wondered if he had made a mistake. But then he saw Ayana, her face fierce as she led her people forward, and he remembered why he was here. He wasn't fighting for glory or revenge. He was fighting for these people, for the women who had shown him kindness when he had least expected it, for the Apache who had been forced to run for far too long. The battle raged on for hours, but slowly, the tide began to turn. The Apache warriors, with their knowledge of the land and their unyielding will, began to push the enemy forces back. The sound of battle began to die down, and Lucas could see that. The enemy was retreating. Victory, though hard won, was within their grasp. As the last of the enemy soldiers fled, Lucas stood among the Apache warriors, his body battered and bruised, but his spirit stronger than ever. Ayana and Kaya rode up to him, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "We did it," Kaya said, her voice quiet but filled with pride. Lucas nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment he had never known before. But he also knew that this victory was just the beginning. The Apache had won this battle, but there were still many more to come. The war was far from over. Ayana turned to him, her expression softening. "This is just the first step, Lucas," she said. "But we will keep fighting. We will fight until we are free." Lucas looked around at the warriors, their faces filled with hope and determination, and he knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger struggle. But no matter what happened next, he was ready to stand beside them, to fight for the Apache, for their freedom, and for a future where they could finally live without fear. The days that followed the battle were filled with both celebration and contemplation. The Apache had won, but the cost of the fight was apparent. The ground was littered with the remains of fallen warriors, both Apache and their enemies. The air still smelled of gunpowder and blood, but there was a quiet sense of relief settling over the camp. Ayana and Kaya, along with the other Apache warriors, were busy tending to the wounded and securing their position. Lucas, though exhausted and battered, couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride in what they had accomplished. The fight had been long and brutal, but they had stood their ground and won. He had stood with them, and in that moment, he knew that he had become a part of their struggle. But the victory was bittersweet. The Apache had fought valiantly, but the war was far from over. As Ayana had told him, this was only the first step. The enemy forces were still out there, and they would not stop hunting the Apache until they were all eradicated. Lucas knew that the fight for survival was only going to get harder. The night after the battle, as the camp settled down, Ayana and Lucas sat by the fire. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a soft light over the land. The crackling of the fire was the only sound that broke the silence. Ayana looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "We've won this battle, but it's just the beginning," she said, her voice low but firm. "There will be more battles to come, more enemies to face." Lucas nodded. He had seen the determination in her eyes during the battle, and he understood the gravity of what lay ahead. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice quiet. Ayana looked into the fire for a long moment before answering. "Now we rest and regroup. We need to gather more allies, more resources. We need to strengthen our position and be ready for whatever comes next." Kaya approached them, her face set in a determined expression. "We can't wait forever," she said. "We need to strike back before they have a chance to recover." Ayana turned to her, a hint of a smile on her lips. "Patience, Kaya. We've come a long way. We need to be smart about our next move." Kaya nodded, but there was a fire in her eyes. Lucas could see that she wasn't the same person who had arrived at his cabin months ago. She had become a fierce warrior, hardened by the trials she had faced. And, like Ayana, she was no longer the quiet, unsure girl who had been lost and frightened. They had both become leaders in their own right, guiding their people through the darkest of times. The next morning, Lucas found himself standing at the edge of the camp, looking out over the vast landscape. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow across the valley. The wind was still, and for a moment, he felt at peace. But then, the reality of the situation returned to him. The war was far from over, and the Apache were still in danger. But they had won this battle, and that was something. As the days passed, the Apache warriors worked tirelessly to prepare for the next step. They fortified their camp, setting traps and building defenses. Ayanna and Kaya spent their time coordinating with the other Apache groups, making sure that their forces were united and ready for whatever came next. Lucas, too, helped however he could. He wasn't a warrior, but he knew the land better than anyone. His knowledge of the terrain was invaluable in helping the Apache strategize. It was during these days of preparation that Lucas truly began to understand the depth of the Apache people's struggle. He had always thought of them as warriors, but now he saw them as survivors, as people who had endured generations of violence and persecution. And yet, through it all, they had never given up. They had fought for their land, their people, and their freedom. They had fought because they had no other choice. Lucas was no longer just an observer in their fight. He had become a part of it, not because he had to, but because he believed in what they were fighting for. One evening, as the camp settled down for the night, Lucas and Ayanna sat together by the fire once again. The air was cool, and the fire flickered in the dark. "You've come a long way, Lucas," Ayanna said softly. "You're not the same man who arrived here all those months ago." Lucas looked at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Neither are you," he said. Ayanna smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "I couldn't have done it without you." Lucas felt a warmth spread through him. The road ahead was uncertain, but in this moment, with the Apache people by his side, he knew he was ready for whatever came next. He wasn't alone anymore. He had found a purpose, and more importantly, he had found a family. The battle for their survival was far from over, but together, they would face it head-on, and Lucas knew they would fight with everything they had. Weeks passed, and the Apache warriors continued their preparations. The tension in the air was palpable, but there was a quiet confidence among them. They had endured so much, and they were determined not to be defeated. Lucas, too, had found a new purpose. He had become more than just a bystander in their fight for survival. He had become a part of their struggle, helping where he could, using his knowledge of the land to guide their strategies. But the looming question remained. Would they be able to hold their ground? Would they be able to protect what was theirs from the forces that sought to destroy them? One morning, as the sun rose and painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, the air was still. The Apache warriors had gathered, their faces serious, their eyes locked with unwavering focus. Lucas stood among them, his heart beating in his chest, his breath steady but shallow. He had never imagined a life like this, one filled with such purpose and danger. He had always been a man of solitude, but now he stood with these warriors, these people who had become his family. Ayanna approached him, her expression calm but determined. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes meeting his. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Lucas nodded, the weight of the moment pressing on him. "I'm ready," he said, though he knew there was no turning back now. The battle they had been preparing for had come. It was time to face their enemies, to fight for their land, their people, and their future. The Apache warriors mounted their horses, and the sound of hooves filled the air. The moment had arrived. Lucas rode alongside Ayanna, Kaya, and the others, his heart pounding in his chest. The enemy forces had gathered in the distance, and the Apache warriors were ready to charge. The air was thick with anticipation as the two groups faced each other on the open plain. The battlefield stretched out before them, and Lucas could feel the weight of the coming conflict. This was the moment that would determine their future. The first shots rang out, and the battle began. The sound of gunfire and the clash of weapons filled the air as the two sides collided. Lucas fought alongside the Apache warriors, his rifle in hand, his movements driven by adrenaline and a sense of duty. The fight was fierce, and the stakes were high. But with each passing moment, Lucas saw the strength of the Apache people. They fought with everything they had, with the fire of generations fueling their every movement. Ayanna fought at the front, leading her people with fierce determination. Kaya, too, was a force to be reckoned with, her strength and skill evident as she took down enemy soldiers with precision. Lucas, though not a trained warrior, fought with the same fire. He had learned from the Apache, and now he stood beside them, doing his part in the fight. Hours passed, and the battle raged on. But the tide was turning. The Apache warriors, with their knowledge of the land and their unwavering will, began to push the enemy back. Slowly, the enemy forces began to retreat. The sound of gunfire faded, and the dust began to settle. The Apache had won. Lucas stood on the battlefield, his body aching, his breath heavy, but his heart full. They had done it. They had fought for their survival, and they had won. As the smoke cleared, Ayanna rode up to him, her face tired but triumphant. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with pride. Kaya rode up beside her, a smile on her face. "We're free," she said quietly, the weight of the victory settling over her. Lucas looked at them, a sense of awe filling him. These women, these warriors, had fought with everything they had, and they had succeeded. But more than that, they had shown him the true meaning of strength. They had shown him that no matter how dark the days might get, there was always hope as long as you kept fighting. As the Apache warriors gathered to celebrate their victory, Lucas knew that their struggle wasn't over. There would be more battles to fight, more challenges to face. But for the first time since he had met Ayanna and Kaya, he felt like he was truly a part of something bigger than himself. He had found a new family, a new purpose. The war for survival was far from over, but they had won this day, and that was something. They had fought for their land, their freedom, and their future. And Lucas knew that, no matter what came next, he would stand by them. Together, they were stronger than any force that could try to tear them apart. Together, they would keep fighting, for their people, for their freedom, and for the legacy of those who had come before them. In this thrilling adventure, we dive into the heart of the Wild West, where survival and strength are tested with every challenge. This story of courage, freedom, and battle follows a lone rancher who, by chance, becomes involved in the fierce struggle of the Apache people. As tensions rise, alliances form, and a fight for freedom begins. The rancher, once living a peaceful life, finds himself standing side by side with Apache warriors, facing overwhelming odds to protect their land and way of life. Through grit, determination, and sacrifice, the Apache warriors prove their strength and resilience in this gripping tale of survival and defiance. In the face of enemies far larger than they could have imagined, the Apache fight for their future, for their freedom, and for the generations to come. This captivating story unfolds with all the elements of great Western stories, bringing to life the raw emotions, deep struggles, and ultimate triumph of the human spirit. Experience the intensity of Western stories like never before as the characters fight not just for survival, but for something much greater, their legacy. With action-packed scenes and moments of deep reflection, this tale will transport you into the heart of the Wild West, where every decision could mean life or death. Discover the legacy of the Apache people and their fight for survival in this unforgettable journey. These Western stories highlight the unbreakable bond between people and the land they fight to protect. Through heart-pounding battles, moments of quiet resolve, and the powerful theme of unity, this is a tale that embodies the very essence of what it means to stand strong in the face of adversity. If you love the rugged spirit of the West, this is a story you won't want to miss. From the dust of the plains to the intense battlefields, these Western stories bring to life the fight for freedom in the harshest of environments.